The following is a production of No U-Turn Radio, recorded and digitally edited by myself, Martin Walker. If you would like a copy on CD or cassette, send email to nouturnradio@netscape.net or call me at 781-391-9933. Thank you for listening to No U-Turn Radio.
I guess I'm going to tell you a little bit about the death penalty in Massachusetts and where we stand with it right now. To introduce myself, my name is Tom Lowenstein. I used to be the political director of Massachusetts Citizens Against the Death Penalty, and I've also been for a while a member of this group, Murder Victims Families for Reconciliation, which is for the potential radio audience. This is a book that I'm holding up. It's a nationwide organization of family members of murder victims who oppose the death penalty, and we also have in the group family members of people who have been executed who also oppose the death penalty. The death penalty in Massachusetts, to give you the 3-minute overview, in 1997 a little boy named Jeffrey Curley was murdered not far from here, and what had always been a traditionally strong anti-death penalty House of Representatives in Massachusetts at that point flipped, and the death penalty actually passed the House in Massachusetts. The way Massachusetts is right now, the governor's pro-death penalty, although we can discuss that at some length. Some people think he's not really for it, he just wants the issue. The Senate has a pro-death penalty majority. So right now, if the General Court, which is what we call the House of Representatives in Massachusetts, if they pass the death penalty, it becomes law. In '97, they passed the death penalty by one vote. They went out, they in the Senate passed the different versions, they came back to settle on one bill. One state rep from Peabody named John Slattery switched his vote, and the death penalty was defeated in Massachusetts on an 80-80 tie. That was in '97. In '99, the last time the bill came up, it was defeated by 80-73. It was also a very close vote. It ended up being 7. That doesn't sound so close, but it was. And this year, even the pro-death penalty people are saying, we don't have a chance, we're just wheeling it out because it's important. Today, actually, as it turns out, we had the hearings in the State House today on the new bill. There's actually, I think, 7. The last count that I saw, there were 7 new death penalty bills. And it seems good this year. It seems as if there's a comfortable anti-death penalty majority. What I want to remind everybody is that this is what everybody thought in 1997 as well. And in 1997, this comfortable majority in the wake of one horrible murder became non-existent. So if you live in Massachusetts and you care about the death penalty, I want to remind you of 2 things. First is, we have an anti-death penalty majority and it's shaky, and you ought to do everything you can to call your state rep. If your state rep is against the death penalty, call them and let them know that you appreciate it. If your state rep is for the death penalty, call them and tell them that you oppose it. I talked to a state rep once when I was doing my political organizing who said to me, if I get 20 phone calls on a given issue, I think it's a landslide. So, I mean, this is very local politics, so be involved, stay involved. Second thing about the death penalty in Massachusetts that's worth noting is the federal government is seeking the death penalty in Massachusetts as we speak for a nurse out in Northampton. A woman by the name of Kristen Gilbert is accused of killing 4 veterans at a VA hospital. And because it occurred on federal property, the federal government says they have the right to seek the death penalty for this woman. Why the federal government, in this age of states' rights, feels the need to come into a state that doesn't have the death penalty but has laws against first-degree murder and prosecute this woman for the death penalty against the wishes of the state is another question entirely, but that's what's going on. So if you oppose the death penalty and you live in Massachusetts, I ask you to be aware of both of those things. I think the central reason why the death penalty, if you guys know what's going on nationally with this issue, there are, I think today, 42 different cities and towns across the country have called for moratoriums. There's a moratorium in Illinois. There's a moratorium bills up in Maryland. I know there's one up in Texas. I'm not saying these all have great chances, but the climate has fundamentally changed in the last 3 years on this issue. And the reason, in my opinion, that we have come to where we are today is because of men like Carriger who have had the courage to come forward, tell their story of what it was like to be on death row. Since 1976, and this number seems to go up almost every day, so I may have it wrong, but by my last count, there have been 95 men let off of death row in this country since 1970. Am I right? Is that?
Last number I heard was 101.
101, okay, so I'm already a week behind. But every week, there are men being let off of death row in this country for crimes that they never committed. In Illinois, the governor of Illinois, when the number of people that they've executed they've executed 12 people in Illinois since 1976. When they let the 13th one off of death row for a crime he hadn't committed, the governor of Illinois, a Republican, had the courage to come forward and say, enough, we're not executing any more people until we fix the system. Whether the system is something that can be fixed is something else that we can talk about later. But the fundamental change in this country on the death penalty has come about because men like Carriger have the courage to get out and talk about it and to tell everybody what they went through and to tell everybody that mistakes happen and innocent men end up on death row. And if we bring the death penalty back to Massachusetts, it's not a question of if we will execute an innocent person, it's a matter of when. So with that introduction, I'd like to thank Paris very much for coming out for this tonight, and I'd like to turn the floor over to him. When he's done, my understanding is that I'll be happy to take questions about murder victims' family members who oppose the death penalty. I know Paris will be happy to take questions about his experience. So he's going to talk for longer, and then when we're done with that, we'll open the floor up to questions. So ladies and gentlemen, Paris Carriger.
Thanks. Finally, I'm at Harvard. My mother would be so pleased. When I discuss the death penalty, one of the things that I do not do is quote statistics, because the death penalty is about people. It is about the systematic use of people as pawns. In 1978, March 13th to be exact, I received a phone call. I was at the home of a friend. He advised me that I should jump in my truck and run down to where he was at a restaurant, whereupon he would pay me the money he owed me. He was an ex-convict too. I ran out, jumped in the truck, turned 2 corners, and ran into enough squad cars and enough automatic weapons to have arrested half the world. Needless to say, I suspended any form of belief. I mean, I knew this was a dream. It had to be. The man says, "Mr. Carriger, you're under arrest for murder." And I said, "What the hell are you talking about?" He says, "I'll talk to you about it downtown." And I said, "I don't think so. I have no idea who you are, but I'm pretty sure you're no friend of mine. You can talk to an attorney." In this one place, I started the ball rolling in a way that is different from most people who are arrested for a crime. In general, most people do not know there is a time to shut up. The system is not set up to clear you. That's not what their job is. Their system is set up with the intention to make a case and move on to the next one. Every year there are, 25 or 30,000 murders. Only a select few are chosen to be the lucky examples. On average, these people tend to be the pathetic cases, those of intellect that is more than moderately deficient, those with no money, no friends, those with no understanding of the situation and the system. Unfortunately, I was what they used to call a street criminal. It was the way I made my living, starting when I was about 12. So I knew the game. I had been in prison for the previous 11 years. I got out, I was out for 90 days. Because that I was getting a lot of grief from my family, I had literally picked up a lunch pail and went to work. Hated every minute of it. But the idea was that I would try it for a year to see if I could stand it, because it was tearing my family apart. When it came time to explain this to an attorney, I received a court-appointed attorney. And quite frankly, he was too busy to listen. He spent 3 hours preparing my case for trial. I don't mean 3 hours talking to me. I'm talking about 3 hours total. Whatever it is that attorneys do, he spent 3 hours doing it. I was convicted. I mean, it was almost a foregone conclusion. I believed that I could prove my innocence. Unfortunately, my belief and something you can drag into a courtroom are not necessarily the same thing. The system has this habit of manipulating the tools. 9 years later, my friend, the man who originally testified against me, came in court and he admitted that he had murdered Mr. Shaw himself and that he had framed me. He gave them chapter and verse for why and how. Actually showed me how to manufacture somebody else's fingerprints. I was deeply attentive, paid a lot of attention. My thought at that time, I was asked by one of the local press what I would do if they freed me and put him in prison. I explained that I had an intention to stick around long enough to try to talk him out of killing him, while I was perfectly willing to whip him till he couldn't stand up. There is nothing in the death penalty, nothing in that form and depth of vengeance that I find acceptable. Like anyone else, if I have to step over the body of a 5-year-old child, I'm going to be angry. And if you caught me while I was angry, I might even possibly be capable of killing. What I would be incapable of doing is pretending that because I thought I needed to do it at the time, that made it right. I would not even attempt to defend such an idea. Most people are under the impression that the United States Constitution gives you rights. It doesn't, not even one. What the U.S. Constitution does is it tells you that they recognize your rights. Unfortunately, they don't even recognize all of them. They just recognize the ones that are convenient to the systems. Among the rights that you have, no matter what you are, you can be an ant, and you have the right to defend your life with anything you can pick up. Unfortunately, this also includes the right of whoever else is standing around with big boots to step on you if they can. Rights don't come without contest. It's never a one-sided deal. Having a right is different from being right. The state of Arizona listened to this man and his family, changed their testimony in 1987. We spent 7 months in hearings, 3 or 4 days now, 3 or 4 days later. It took 7 months to complete it. When they got done, the judge said that it was clear that Mr. Dunbar, the only witness against me, was a liar, but they didn't know which story they wanted to believe. Actually, they knew which one they wanted to believe, they just didn't know which one was true. 12 years later, I was within 3 hours of execution. It was my 6th execution warrant. 20 years, more or less, had passed, and I was tired. Death looked like a pretty good deal to me. The fact that I was innocent, well, it wasn't particularly important. That much time in a cell that's 5 feet wide and 7 feet long makes everything you've got hurt. The muscles of my hips and back had atrophied to the point where that I couldn't walk 60 feet. I was in a wheelchair. I was constantly ill, constantly in pain. The new political reality was that medical treatment was one of those things you ought to reserve for those people who could afford it. That certainly wasn't anybody on death row. Finally, the Ninth Circuit Court told them that they had to give me a new trial. It took a year to get me back to the county jail and start the machinery rolling. The prosecutors showed up one afternoon and they said, here's the way it is. We're offering you a deal. It's called nolo contender. It means the state gets to tell their version and you keep your mouth shut. They get what is essentially a guilty plea for second-degree murder and armed robbery, and I get to go free immediately. They explained to me that the flip side of this was that if I chose to demand that new trial and take the risks that there was still evidence enough to clear me after 20 years, that it would take 2 years to get that trial done, and I would be sitting in that cell another 2 years. I didn't even hesitate. As far as I was concerned, they could call me anything they wanted to, as long as I was free. We made the deal, we signed the papers, and everybody played as if we were old friends and buddies who had just mutually defeated the terrible situation that might have embarrassed some politician. You may take my word for it. I was not terribly pleased with the idea of participating in not embarrassing a politician. I was supposed to be freed on Saturday. Instead, they show up Friday night and they say, "You're getting out now." They didn't even call my people. My attorney didn't know. I didn't have clothing. My attorney was supposed to bring that. They take me downstairs in a wheelchair, and this time, instead of an inmate pushing the wheelchair, there's a cop pushing the wheelchair. I mean, I personally approved. I finally found a job one of them could do. That sounds nasty, but it seems like the truth. Okay, we get downstairs, and they're fixing to let out 25 or 30 people, you know, whoever's finished doing their jail time. The guard counts out $1,161, which is how much money I had on my account. And they counted out to me in cash in front of 25 or 30 scofflaws and small-time thieves. He looks around and he says, "I'll give you a 10-minute head start." To this day, I don't know if he was telling me the truth or not. They had me dressed in a coverall kind of thing, about the same consistency as Scott towels, actually made of paper. I remember the effort of leaning against the wall and following the corners to make it out to the doors. Walked out, stepped out from underneath the overhang on the jail and looked up at the sky and froze. I hadn't seen the night sky in 20 years. Oh, it was pretty, but it was also way too big. Needed something a lot smaller. The guys up in the cell block where they just let me out of apparently knew what was cooking because they called my sister. And my sister came down to the county jail and led me off, you know, like somebody's decrepit old uncle, which I probably am to somebody. And we have ever since tried to work out a system of explaining and dealing with this situation. Now I run around to the various legislatures and groups and I throw rocks. As far as I'm concerned, I get to throw rocks at everybody because there's enough blame to go around. We have sit on our butts and allow the federal government and the state governments to pretend that they and only they know what is right and best for all of us. They ignore whatever qualms we might have when we question the internal ethics of some of the things they claim are necessary. Now, I was over there at the State House this morning, and I listened, watched, and I even testified a little bit. I walked away from it feeling very depressed because it seems to me like that what we had was a show. The system was going to let everybody vent, rant, rave, and in the end, people who didn't know a damn thing about it were going to make the decisions for us, just like they always have. That's okay with me as long as they decide, no, we're not going to have that. But I don't know how far we can trust them to do that. A politician is, by the very nature of what he does, a person who holds his fingers up to the wind to decide what it is that he thinks. And I don't know when the next child is going to die, or what stoned out, flaked out idiot is going to make the perfect poster boy for executions. Therefore, it seems to me like we need to come in here and tell you about some of the reality of what the death penalty is made of. I listened to the litany of these various bills that are going to pass that says, oh, we've got these safeguards in them. Well, every one of those safeguards were in Arizona's system before they did it to me. Been there for years. And the holes and the flaws in the system come from a number of things. First, there's no way for you to know when somebody's lying to you, if he's any good at it. If you're sitting on a jury and X number of witnesses come in and they decide this is the story they want to tell you, 2 or 3 of them repeat it, you figure, well, if there's that many people telling the same story, it must be the truth. People lie. Practically everybody does it at least once a day. Most of the time, it's not that big a lie. And the reason for doing it is not that important. Sometimes it can be just as simple as you're ashamed to admit that you don't know. But sometimes cops and such will do it because they'd like to keep their job. And their bosses really don't want to hear about how they made a mistake. Now, I'm not against cops and I'm not against anybody else. What I am for is the idea that there is a reality in these things. And as long as the reality is what it is, I don't want any final solutions to anything. I want the ability 40 years from now to go back and re-examine anything that we've done, and if necessary, apologize, pay reparations, or put somebody else in jail. If you can prove to me you've done something that did not deserve what you got. Now, in the death penalty, we have something we call death qualification. Anytime that a jury is picked from a group of citizens to hear a capital case, the prosecutor runs over and he says, do you believe in the death penalty? The process is called voir dire. Neat name, and what it means is they're kicking off everybody off that jury that disagrees with the penalty. There have been a number of studies that show that a death-qualified jury, one that is made up entirely of people who believe in the death penalty, is at least 3 times more likely to convict than one that has either a mix or people opposed to the death penalty. People who are willing to put the death penalty front burner tend, as a general idea, to be a little more certain that they know what's right. And they also tend to be a little more willing to inflict it. Not much. I mean, we're all people. You can take my word for it. On any given day, any of us is capable of most of what I'm accusing the world of. The system pretends that a man who's on trial for his life has a fairly decent chance of presenting the evidence. They appoint him an attorney. In my case, it was a man who was a political hack in the first place, who didn't bother to come and visit me prior to the trial. One of the 2 attorneys involved had never met me before the trial started, much less ever talked to me. They give these attorneys a specific amount of money to run a capital case with. In some states, it's as little as $600. Average is about $3,000. Average investigator's fee is about $150 an hour. Average lawyer's fees about $200 an hour for the low end of the echelon. The big attorneys don't touch these cases. There's no way to make a living at it. There's no way to keep your money or make a profit. Figure junk bond attorney. I mean, that's not a real term. That's just one of them things that comes over the counter for 10 cents on the dollar. Makes $200 an hour. He gets $3,000 for this case. That is, what, 15 hours? It's going to take him longer than that to do the jury, to do the time. I mean, this is if he doesn't put any time or money in experts, investigation, or lab tests. If he does any of that stuff, the next thing he's doing is dipping into his own pocket to pay for it. How many attorneys are going to do that? And if he did it, how long would they keep him out of a nut house? Guy can't add doesn't belong in a lawyer's suit. So inherently, there's something wrong with this idea. Yes? Oh, okay. Inherently, there's something wrong with this idea. The pretense is that you can somehow make the system work if you can just correct all these little housekeeping details. Well, the truth of the matter is that 2,000 ignorant people voting on a dumb idea are not about to come up with a decision that's smarter than they are. And the system makes it a point to keep them dumb and happy. They're not allowed to have this information. They're not allowed to have that information. And by the time you get done, they have done what the best liars in the world do. A good liar doesn't tell you a story you can go check on. A good liar tells you what he wants you to know, and he leaves out the stuff that will lean your head one way or the other. The devil's in the details, and it doesn't change. I was listening to the point lady for the death penalty this morning at the House hearings. She lied to him at least 8 times that I know of by not mentioning certain parts of what that reality was. And she went through the litany. The pretense that this is a workable idea, that it's even a good idea, is absolutely false on every level that I know of. Most people don't realize that there's a payback that comes from the death penalty. For the moment, let me use a young black man as an example. He doesn't exist. This is one I'm just making up in my head. Young black man comes in, and the first thing he's going to do is tell his mama that this is prejudice. I mean, it doesn't matter how good the evidence is. He could be guilty as hell, and that's still what he'll tell him. Or he could be innocent, and that's what he'll tell him. And because most people are not familiar with what the law is, what it does, and how it does it, what we wind up with is you listen and you decide who you believe. A family is biased in favor of the man that they have, whether he's guilty or not. So she will go home and tell the rest of them, boys being harmed by the system. This is another attempt by Whitey to go get him. And it may well be. Such things do happen. In my own case, I have 143 nieces and nephews. Every one of these people have children. Every one of these people and their children watched the system go through these appeals. They knew what the evidence was, they knew how it was answered, and what wasn't answered. So when it was all done, we had roughly 500 people that were connected to me personally, who believed in me personally, who now say that the system cannot be trusted. My belief is that there is a permanent hole in the system where my family stands. My bet is that there is a hole just like it that stands around every man that they attempt to kill. There's a thing called family myth. It's these stories for how a family deals with the connections in society. Every man who has died on the road, whether he was guilty or not, you can bet there is someone out there who thinks he got a raw deal. Part of it is the rules of the court. Part of it is the fact that everybody involved lies, and it doesn't matter to which side. Any system that has that many lies in it cannot be managed and reach to justice. Justice is the process of treating the world and facts as if it was your checkbook. As long as you have all the proper entries, every one of them, you can reach the truth. You can come to a decision of what's in the bank account. But if just one fact is missing, you haven't got a prayer reaching the truth. And some politician will tell you about how these facts are in and of themselves the truth. They are not. Prosecutors, when they tell the story in front of a jury, they're not telling you what happened. They are playing with the shadows. They are telling you what they think happened. And judging purely by what I've seen, I don't think I want any of that. I think right now you have as clear an idea what the death penalty is all about as I can give you. So at this point, I'd like to turn this back into question and answer, and you can take it in any direction you wish. I thank you for your time.
How do you feel about Timothy McVeigh wanting his execution to be on national TV?
My impression of Timothy McVeigh is that whatever he wants, we should do the opposite. So if Mr. McVeigh wants to die, I say let's keep him alive for 50 years. And if Mr. McVeigh wants to martyr himself on television, I say let's not do it for him. I do think that there's an interesting issue as to whether executions ought to be televised or not. And I do think that if people who believe in execution weren't somewhat ashamed of it, they would be pushing for it to be on TV more than it is. On the other hand, I'm not at all sure that that would be a good thing. I think we live in a callous enough society without that. But for McVeigh, I think in that case, I certainly wouldn't televise that execution.
My suspicion is that most people do not know what Mr. McVeigh knows at this point. Prison ain't much fun. Now, the public perception is that a man on death row or in prison in general sits in his bunk and watches television and generally lives the life of Riley. Now, I was in there in one of them where that I had television, radio, all that stuff. And if I could have found somebody under a bridge who didn't have anything, who wanted to trade me, I would have traded him. You see, the harsh part of prison is not prison. It's who you have to live with. In 20 years, I was stabbed 31 times. Mostly because that me and other people disagreed about which of my stuff I should keep. But until you have lived 4 or 5 days listening late at night while somebody sharpened a homemade knife on the floor, knowing he's fixing to kill somebody or try to, and knowing it could be you, you have no idea how tough prison can be. Now, I can sit up here and smile, and quite frankly, I'm very good at passing off jokes. But in these instances, most of the time, I was unable even to go get medical help afterwards, because that would have branded me a snitch, and it would have brought out people into the area of attempting to kill me who would have then felt they had reason and would have taken an awful lot of chances to do it. As it was just whoever it was that thought that he could have a reputation if he killed somebody else. You see, a reputation, something where that he makes the population afraid of him, gives him a little more safety. The pretense of the system is that, oh yeah, guards and cops control the prison. That's bull. They stand up on the wall with rifles to keep you in and keep everybody out, and they let us settle it amongst ourselves. And it is a hellhole you would not believe, and I guarantee you a TV doesn't make it any better. Mr. McVeigh, if they were to kick him out of that isolation protective custody cell he's sitting in right now, would live about 20 minutes. And he knows it, and so does everybody else. It is not necessary to kill that man. That man is spending his days in terror, and probably rightly so from what I can gather. There is this thing called suiting the punishment to fit the crime. And call me sadistic, I suspect he's got just about what he's got coming.
I work with the campaign to end the death penalty, and it's been my great privilege and honor over the last few years to work with a number of people who have, like Mr. Carriger, been wrongly convicted and have been incarcerated on death row. And one of the things that we have felt has been very important to this is actually having, in addition to talking to your senators and representatives, but to raise the profile of the death penalty in a more visible way, such as protests, demonstrations outside of death rows, outside of state houses when the bills come up. I think that this was very important when the death penalty was narrowly defeated in the state a couple of years ago. It's been something that's turned the tide in places like Illinois and other places, and I was wondering how you felt about the tactic of direct action, bringing in families, survivors such as yourself, and making the case against the death penalty a more visible way.
I applaud your efforts. I am also of the opinion that the only thing that our system truly understands is that which it cannot control. As soon as it gets to the point where whatever it is costs too much or is embarrassing, they'll quit doing it. I am under the impression that we're not there yet. My suspicion is that before this ends, they're going to have to get caught with their hand in the cookie jar. Somebody innocent is going to die. Somebody very provably innocent. It's just a matter of time. So far the state's been getting by because that once they execute a man, the evidence is destroyed. It is almost impossible to go back and do a realistic scientific post-mortem. What I did hear was a prosecutor once bragged to me that in his opinion, only one case out of every 10 was decided incorrectly. And of this one case in 10, half of them were freed when they should not have been, and half of them were executed, or at least convicted. Now, if you use those numbers, there are some 3,700 people on death row nationwide. That means, 5 for every 100, 165, 170 people on death row that are probably innocent according to the state's own numbers. Now, my own opinion is that the number is 3 times that high. On Arizona's death row, they've already had to release about 10 people. That's not an exact number. That's just a rough guess over 20, 25 years. I never bothered to count. They weren't impressed, and quite frankly, if it didn't impress them, I didn't bother thinking of it. But among the cases that I helped prepare, I worked as a jailhouse lawyer. There were 12 cases where that, in my opinion, the state never proved them guilty of anything. And they're still there. Well, one of them's not. He's dead. And what they did in that case is they offered his brother a deal to give him life instead of death. They got a confession out of him that wasn't worth the paper it was written on, and then reneged on the deal and used the confession anyway. The games that go on in the death penalty, the manipulation of one human being against another, the practice of teaching you to die using years in a cell. Wrong atmosphere for me. How about you?
Well, I think one slightly less theoretical number that we can all look at is in the last 20 years there have been about 100 people let off of death row for crimes they didn't commit, and there have been about 650 people executed. So, I mean, if that holds true, how many innocent men are there on death row? To get back to your question, I think that the government kills people in this country every week in our name. They do it on our behalf. They do it because they think we want them to. If you live in Massachusetts and you think that means they don't do it in your name, as I said, they're prosecuting a woman right now in Massachusetts for the death penalty. The federal government is. They're going to kill Timothy McVeigh because they think we all want them to. If you don't believe in the death penalty in this country, I believe you owe it to yourself to stand up and say it. And I recommend and I commend anyone who will do that. I think when you get into the area of particular politics and which politics works and doesn't work, all I'll say is this. When I was political director of Massachusetts Citizens Against the Death Penalty, it was my firm belief that there were 4 or 5 white, middle-of-the-road, representatives in the State House of Massachusetts who were going to decide whether we had the death penalty in this state or not. And I felt that my job as the political director of that group was to make whichever arguments were going to be the most effective for those 5 people. And I would urge everybody to speak out on what you think is right and to think of who your audience is. Because I've done rooms full of police officers on the death penalty where I'm the one against it and there's 40 guys for it. And in my experience in those rooms, there were never more than 2 or 3 African Americans. And if I said race in the first 3 sentences, I lost that room for the rest of the night. I was arguing with them over whether cops were racist. I'm not saying that's not an argument worth having. I'm not saying letting them off the hook. I'm just telling you, if you want to talk about the death penalty, I urge you, know your audience, know who you're talking to. The death penalty is wrong at every level. The more people know about it, the more they're going to agree. Whether they don't care about race and they only care about people like Paris, get to them on that level. Whether they don't care whether innocent people die, most of them won't admit that, but they do care about economic inequality, talk to them about that level. Again, this is the more people know about this issue, the more they're against it. So find out what the person is going to care about and give them the information that they need. I think a student in Massachusetts can do 2 things. I think there's real impact to be had in Massachusetts. And one of the things about Massachusetts nationally, the political scene, is we're all a bunch of left-wing freaks here anyway, right? So if Massachusetts doesn't have the death penalty, it doesn't matter because we went from McGovern and we're a bunch of commies, the People's Republic of Cambridge. If we lose the death penalty in Massachusetts, there's this huge tide nationally against the death penalty now. If they somehow get it through here, that's a message to the rest of the country that everybody wants it. So be involved while you're here. If you want to join Massachusetts Citizens Against the Death Penalty, that's one group. There's the campaign to end the death penalty. There are groups that do there's amnesty, of course. There's all kinds of groups. Get involved, be vocal while you're here. And while you're home, do the same thing. The death penalty is an island of barbarism, right? That's in a vast river of righteousness. And it's getting eaten away at slowly. Every time Paris does a room like this, there's a few more people that are against it. And this is something whose time it's coming to an end. And the people that are for it know it. And you can tell they know it because they will express their faith in the system that no rational person could look at the system in Texas and say, that's fine. No one could do that. Now, I'm not claiming that Governor Bush actually looked at it and then was dishonest. I think he didn't even look at it in the first place. But the point is, if you know your stuff and you get in touch with your people back where you're from, and you're vocal about this and we organize, we can end the death penalty in our lifetime. I really believe that. So be involved while you're here, because it's important to not have it here, and be involved when you're home, too.
The saddest thing that I know of will be the understanding that somebody is going to be the last man executed. And for that last man, I sincerely apologize to his family that I could not find a way to be there sooner.
How do you deal with, or even get over, your anger over the fact that 20 years of your life were taken away from you?
Well, actually, I didn't have to get over it. Unfortunately, you see, the way I looked at it, I knew who did that to me, and it wasn't but one person. And the rude little bastard died on me in 1991, and I never got a chance to do a thing. But the way I look at it is they took 20 years. Why would I want to sit around and brood about it and give them any more? It isn't important. It stopped. I felt better the instant they quit talking about killing me. What else is there to say on the subject?
I just wanted to say, and it's another number thing with Paris and I guess, but my father's been dead for 20 years. And I think that it's another part of this debate. I mean, there's no one that I know of that's going to stand up and say we ought to kill innocent people in this country, or it's okay that we do. And I think that in terms of moving on, I think that one thing that we should bring up here, and I'm not saying that I've reached it with I don't know the guy that killed my father. I don't want to know him. There's probably nothing that anybody in this room could devise to do to him where I would feel sorry for him or think he didn't deserve it. It's not about that. It's about how do we move on with ourselves. And I guess I wish when I sit here and I hear what you say about that, I wish that I had the ability to stop thinking about that guy, and I wish that I had the ability to not care anymore about him. I hope that will happen for me. It hasn't yet, and I don't know that it ever will. But what we need to be looking at, everybody here probably knows this already, but we have to look at ourselves and what makes us better. And what Paris is an example of is the guy who's willing to pick himself up from an ordeal and move on with life and put it out of his mind. And I'm not saying that we're all going to be able to put all the pain out of our mind and the murders that some of these people commit of our family members. But that's what we have to do, because it's about us and what makes us better. It's not about them anymore. And I admire, when I say I admire your ability to do that, it's a gross understatement. I envy it too.
Mr. Carriger, it says that the person who accused you testified in '86 that you weren't guilty, but it took until 1999 to release you from prison. What kind of technicalities held back the process? Because, in some of the Hollywood movies, you see the person getting off death row right when the lethal injection is being put in, and because, a call happens, that's not the way it really happens, right?
Well, you have to understand that the system never makes mistakes. If you don't believe it, just ask him. When he got done confessing, they found 101 reasons for why they decided not to believe him. And the fact that they admitted that he was the biggest liar this side of the Mississippi didn't change a thing. It was still sufficient because they had invested political capital in my death. Every 4 years, we had a state attorney general who would stand up on the steps of the courthouse and talk about how that if he was reelected this year, they'd get Carriger. He's not attorney general anymore.
I wanted to add one other thing to that, which is just to amplify it. The assumption is that in America you're innocent until proven guilty. That's not true after your first trial. It may not even be true at your first trial. But there's a guy on death row in Texas right now whose lawyer slept through his trial. And someone appealed out on the grounds of ineffective counsel. I think we'd all agree a sleeping lawyer is a bad lawyer. The U.S. Court of Appeals just said, no, that's not true. Because you can't prove that even though the lawyer slept, that had the lawyer not slept, the person would have been found innocent. Once your first trial is over, you are guilty until you can present to the state evidence that you are innocent. And if you think about how hard that is to do, you understand, and everything that Paris said, they have a lot of money and time invested in making sure that you're on the road. How do you turn all that around and prove that you didn't do it? Prove that you weren't somewhere.
As a matter of law, you are presumed innocent until you are convicted, at which point the burden of proof shifts. Now, my statement is that except for those of you who proved that you were not born in 1978, there ain't anybody in this room who can prove that they didn't kill Mr. Shaw. Not now. The problem with this is, politically, it has become more convenient to simply not think, to simply elect those people who will pat you on the head and tell you, don't worry about it, I'll take care of it. Unfortunately, I've seen what they've been doing with what they took care of, and I don't want that in my yard.
I have a question, but first I just want to make a brief comment about Timothy McVeigh. I see Timothy McVeigh as a victim in many ways, notwithstanding the victims of the action that he took. And maybe that's hard for some people to sympathize with, but I don't think Timothy McVeigh should be executed because it's not what he wants. I think he shouldn't be executed because he shouldn't be executed because it's not what we should be doing. And that's not what you said. Perhaps someone has a comment, but I wanted to ask you, given the horror story that you told about being in prison, going beyond the death penalty, what about reforming the prison system and the criminal justice? And what about the reforms that need to be made?
Let's go back to Mr. McVeigh for a moment. I have a public persona that I adopt because in most ways I am secular, coldly practical, and I have the kind of experience that, quite frankly, allows me to get away with these flip answers that, quite frankly, suck. But they provoke thought. They provoke argument. They bring on the dialogue that we need. So I use them. As for Mr. McVeigh being a victim, I would say that's accurate. But then again, I'm of the belief that we're busy making our next crop of criminals down in kindergarten right now. They steal the money that they should have been using on them kids for sports equipment, music, art, the kind of things that make decent little human beings. And it's like they were building a funnel that runs directly from kindergarten to the prison. And what none of them seems to be willing to accept is that the $3,000 per child they steal from a kid down there goes to $35,000 a year up there in the prison. Somebody can't add, but they got a bunch of friends they want on the state payroll. Having said that, it is a fact that, in my opinion, probably half of the people that are in the prisons are there because they were first partly the state's victim. They were children who were not protected when they should have been. They are children where that when you read their jackets, you will find these odd little remarks on. Let me give you a specific example. There's a man on Arizona's death row by the name of Bob Mormon. Bob has a 65 IQ, something like that. He killed his adopted mother and was cutting her up and putting her into the toilet to hide the body. Now, this is, according to most people, fairly horrendous. Apparently, this was not the first time he attempted to kill her. He tried once before, and it was hushed up. She had a bullet hole in her, and there was no bullet hole in any of her clothing, and she was in his room. It was felt that this was possibly demeaning and therefore not something they wanted to push. So we know there was something going on here that hasn't quite come to the light of day even now. I helped prepare his appeals, and one of the things that I got was his adoption papers. It's a file about yay thick. And he's about 7 years old. He's hydrocephalic, has an IQ of 60. One side is partially paralyzed and drags. The woman who adopted him couldn't adopt through any normal thing. She could not pass the screening. On the front of the jacket, the judge who handled it wrote the initials FLKPPP, underlined it 3 times. I messed with this particular inscription on that file for 3 months. Finally, I wrote and asked. The secretary finally answered it. The initials meant funny-looking kid, piss-poor prospects. The judge did it. Knew what he was doing. Yet whenever this man is now up here, he's a man who belongs in an assisted care facility at a psychiatric facility. He does not belong in prison. What he did, you can bet, the state's hot hand is wrapped around 50% or more of it. They knew better than put him in a position like that. And once he was in a position like that, they could see it going sour, and they did nothing. This is not unusual. The man who put me on death row was named Robert Dunbar. In the time that he was free after he put me on death row, he molested every one of the stepchildren in his step family and tried to kill his wife. At a hearing in 1982, one of the other children told the court that's what was going on. The court and everybody else ignored it because they felt that this was something that would interrupt their nice, neat little case. The interesting part is now that the 3 boys in that family are now in prison doing time as pedophiles. Direct result of what they were taught. The state put them away, talking about, oh yeah, bad, bad, shame. The state's hot little hand was in that. They knew better, they didn't defend any of them, and once they knew what was going on, they didn't attempt to mitigate it or stop it. Like I said, there's enough blame to go around. And anytime the state tells you this, that, and the other thing is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, start running. They're after your wallet next. On the rest of it, I'm not yet at the point where that I feel like I have a sufficient understanding of the problem to truly voice how I feel. Mostly when I look out at kids like yourselves, I feel greatly pleased and hopeful. And when I look at what's going on in the justice system, in the prisons and the like, I feel an absolute despair. So mostly I try to go fishing so that I don't have to feel either one. There is a limit to how much stress one fat old man can put up with. But as soon as I find an answer to anything, I'll come out here and shoot my mouth off. I am not bashful. Yes?
During those 20 years, what was the worst thing that happened to you or that you felt during this time? Despair and...
I have an exact answer for that.
Did you have any hope during this time that you would get out? Or was it just like, okay, it's fine?
That stuff wasn't it. Despair, hope, despair again, and that is the pattern of what death row is. You approach each new appeal and you've got hope this time, maybe. And when it goes off, you spend 3 weeks to a month trying to figure out whether suicide is, useful or not. But those things really didn't cause me that much problem. What caused me a problem was the fact that the state gave me hepatitis C. My liver is slowly being destroyed. I'm dying. I'm not going to do it anytime soon. My own intention is I'll wait until after I finish suing the state for $12.5 million. I don't think it's going to work. I mean, they got this habit. They'll drag it out as long as they can. But for no other reason than the fact that I did not show the proper level of respect for the system. They dragged me out of my cell, handcuffed me, took me down to a cell that had a psychiatric inhabitant that the prison called the Flying Nun. The man had this peculiar habit of climbing up on the rails and diving off on his head in an attempt to commit suicide. He had hepatitis C. He also thought that the prison was beaming rays at him, and his protection for these things was to wipe feces 2 inches thick on the walls. They took him out, they put me in there, and they falsified the papers to say that the cell was clean and habitable. They also got caught at it. It's documented. But win, lose, or draw, the moment that I had hepatitis C, I had a second death sentence, one I could not appeal. That is the worst thing they did to me. They made justice impossible. And there's no way to punish any of them except money. They're immune from prosecution. The system will protect their actions. They're not liable. The state is liable, but in Arizona they've got this neat law that says if I sue them and I win, the money doesn't come to me. The money goes into a victim witness program to pay victims for other crimes. I think it's unconstitutional. We'll argue about it. But that is, in fact, the state of the law in Arizona at the moment. I wish that I could truly show you a picture of prison. A minute ago, the man asked, is there something that needs to be changed? Truth of the matter is you need to knock that prison down. 95% of the people in them prisons, while they may well deserve to be punished, that doesn't serve the need. It doesn't work, it's expensive, and quite frankly, it generally tends to make them worse than they went in. If we had any brains, when a kid came in for stealing, we'd take 5 years out of our busy schedules and we'd teach him to make as much money as he could make legally. I mean, we'd teach him every trick in the book. And we would hope he could be a new Bill Gates, because then we could tax the hell out of him. But instead, the system has this peculiar idea that once that you're an ex-convict, that should be the end of it. That for all time to come, you are forever a pariah and a second-class citizen. In Oklahoma, they've got this law that says that I'm not allowed to vote until I've been free as long as I was in. I've explained to them I'll probably lose interest before then. But there is a good side. I don't have to take sides. I can throw rocks at everybody, and I personally enjoy that. It is my personal therapy. Give me a little while longer, and I'm going to be the healthiest person in this room. It does seem to me like, though, that you don't put a man in prison that you intend to let out if you put him in for longer than 5 years. Beyond that, the leap to change back is too great. I've been out 2 years, and I have to have a minder every time I'm in a strange place, because I can't do some of the things that you would do and not even notice.
I moved here from Germany 4 years ago, and I was dumbstruck by the length of the sentences that are meted out here. I just couldn't believe it. What is this? I mean,
it's called justice, haven't you heard? What we have is a system where a guy steals $50 in a supermarket robbery, he gets 50 years. If the same guy happens to be a buddy of Bush's or a buddy of whichever politician, and he steals $5.5 million, he gets a year's probation and a $100,000 fine. I don't know what happens to the rest of the money.
Sounds like before the French Revolution.
Yeah? Yeah, but I don't think I want my head on a pike to prove it.
Have you met any of the prison wardens?
Yes, I have. Sheriff Garvey invited me out to his little establishment the other day to talk to the men. And while I approve of his ideas, he's still running a prison. And I'm of the opinion that something that creates more damage than it solves in the way of a problem is a crime against nature. I don't know what all the answers are. Being glib and cutesy about it, the end result is that we have a society that has grown miserable for 2 generations. We've literally been throwing away our generations as fast as we could build them. And it seemed to start somewhere in the 50s. Of course, it may also be that that was as far back as I could remember, and that may have started before that. But it seems to me like that I've been watching kids come into the prisons who are cold in a way that I find frightening, and I'm not easy to scare. They don't understand something like love. They're constantly angry. There is nothing in the way of a conscience or a governor on them that I can see. What we have appears to be a system of psychiatry extremes. I mean, you see them in our television shows. I mean, these people are squirrel-caged nuts. They don't understand the concept of coming down to take care of their own mother. I have literally just, made a deal to purchase a half interest in some property over where I'm at. The man we bought it from is about 85. His wife is almost 80. She's got a brain tumor, and she's in a wheelchair. And they've been divorced for almost 30 years. They're living together because their own kids don't see the value in coming to help take care of either one of them. And these are nice people. These are not thugs, brutes, criminally insane, nothing. They're plain old, everyday people. And for some reason or other, their own kids are unable to deduce that perhaps there's a debt owed to one's parents. And it's not the only place that they seem to have no connection to the world I understand. They're not alone. A lot of my friends are working girls. By that I mean prostitutes. People I know. To me, they're people working a job. They're selling the only thing they got. The only thing the government can't put a meter on. And if you listen to them, you understand that the world isn't playing by the same rules where they're at. There's something wrong here, and I don't know what it is. I've been gone, and while I was gone, the world went nuts. You guys out here are literally as crazy as the ones inside. And I don't know which group scares me the most. We sit around and we talk about the death penalty. Who gave who the right to vote somebody else's life out of existence? What conceit? I mean, does that mean that if I walk into a store, I've got 6 votes in my hand, there are 3 votes behind the counter, that I'm running a democracy instead of an armed robbery? Something is wrong here. And it's not just the fact that these things are wrong, but we have lost the ability to talk about it, to reason. If it were up to me, every child would have a safe, warm place to sleep. It only seems right. It seems to me like we need to be in a position where that any woman, any child, has the right to walk up to any man and ask for assistance or protection. But it doesn't happen. People are standing around watching while other people are kicked to death.
How do you reason with murder victims or their relatives, family members who feel the only way to achieve closure would be the death of a murderer?
How do I reason with them?
Yeah, how do you reason with them?
The bottom line of having someone in your family murder, I don't know if anyone else in here has been through that. I don't know if you've been through that. The person that you lost is gone forever. And that's the easiest thing in the world to understand intellectually and the hardest thing in the world. I mean, it's 20 years later and I still wake up some days missing my dad and thinking it would just be possible to talk to him somehow. And when I was thinking about a lot of these things when you were talking about prisons and how they are. The focus to me, it's not about the killer. I mean, everybody has something horrible that happens to them in their life, and the question at a certain point becomes not, what do they deserve, but how do you move on with your life? So when I understand why people feel that way. I understand politicians manipulate a lot of people into being for the death penalty. There's no question about it, and there's a lot of the reasons why we have such incredibly long sentences. I always challenge audiences that I talk to, if anyone here wants to be the first ever person to run for state rep in Massachusetts on a platform of reforming prisons and bringing education to prisoners, I will back you all the way, and we'll probably get about 8 votes, but we'll run a hell of a campaign while we do it. But again, the point is, when you put someone into a situation like that and you make them worse and they get out, they do it again, that hurts us. So you can't focus on the hate and the anger your whole life. You have to focus on, the guy that killed my father, I'll just say this much, I spent probably 12 to 15 years wanting to kill him. And I spent probably 4 or 5 of those years feeling like I wasn't a real person if I didn't. I never thought the state ought to be doing it. What you were saying earlier about I would never think it was right. I never thought it was the right thing to do. I felt like I had to prove it. And when I finally proved that I was a person by doing it, what I finally realized was that what I had to do was get on with my own life and I was only making myself miserable. And I think if you look at the death penalty, it's what I try to say to people. The death penalty is making our country worse, not better. I'm not saying I'd be for it morally if it somehow made it better, but it makes us all worse. It demeans us all. It's unjust. It's immoral. And in doing all that, we make ourselves worse. So I try to say to them, I mean, I'm never going to say to someone else, I've never said to Jeffrey Curley's father, you shouldn't feel that way. Or, what I say to them is, I understand how you feel. I feel the same way. It's a matter of what do we do about it as a society. It's not very convincing, as you can tell.
May I make one comment about the purpose of law? The reason that we started making laws was so that the Hatfields and the Coys would quit killing each other off. You kill one of mine, we got to come back and kill one of yours or even two of yours, and you've got to turn around and come back to ours. Well, the purpose of law was to remove events from the concept of vengeance. It was never intended to be the instrument of vengeance for one side or the other. And somehow we've managed to pervert this, and for the life of me, I can't understand how that was done. But we've got to stop it. Somebody's got to grow up. This is as good a place as any to start.
About every 2 years when the death penalty comes up in Massachusetts, I usually get a few phone calls to do radio shows. I love doing that. My favorite thing is national call-in radio. Yeah. The first time I ever did one, it was 3 days after I got involved. I had no statistics, and I was debating a law professor from Utah. So he's wailing on me completely. Like he says, I've investigated every single case of someone who claimed, they claim was innocent after the execution, but I've looked into every one myself, and I can tell you it's not true. They were all guilty. Now, I know that's a bunch of horse crap, but it's, rhetorically, it's killing me. And everybody that's calling in is saying, you don't love your father. If you loved your father, you wouldn't feel that way. And finally, one guy calls in, and he's just like this. He says, I like to say that the young man from Massachusetts is exactly right about the death penalty, drunk off his skunk. So I thanked him for his support and moved on. Anyway, no, I don't. I mean, Murder Victims' Families for Reconciliation is I don't know. I would never try to say that most victims' families feel the way we do. I know a lot more do than will say it. Bud Welch, whose daughter died in Oklahoma City, who I work with a lot, I was talking to him today. They just dedicated the memorial yesterday. And I said, Bud, are you the only one of that group that you know who's opposes the death penalty? And he said, no, I just am the only one who'll talk about it. The state holds out the execution like a carrot. The state says to you, here's how you're going to feel better. Here's closure. And they really don't want to hear. I mean, if you're a victim's family member who's opposed to the death penalty, in Illinois or in a state that has it, they literally will not let you be part of the judicial proceedings because they don't want the court to know that you don't want the death penalty. The media, I don't believe in media conspiracies. I believe they cover what's interesting and of the moment.
Whatever sells newspapers.
Whatever sells newspapers. Maybe we don't sell newspapers by, saying don't kill people. Maybe that's not as, maybe there's someone else we could want to kill, and then they would be interested. But anyway,
that's our problem. We're not sexy.
Yeah, I'm working on it.
You've spoken a lot of politicians who defend the death penalty because it's politically expedient, but what factions are they really selling that to?
Well, I think I can jump on this one for 1 second. Today, by the way, was in the long and glorious reign of Paul Cellucci in Massachusetts. Today was a highlight. Paul Cellucci, who supposedly supports the death penalty, today put forward to be passed the exact same bill he put forward in 1998, under which he modeled on an Illinois law that has since been stopped because it was so bad. And at the time of the hearing is going on, I asked one of the reporters where Paul Cellucci was, and he had just gone out to lunch. So this is the governor. I mean, clearly he's backing this bill. He's put a lot of thought into it. Most people statistically support the death penalty. The number are dropping, but right now in America, I think it's 65% support it. If you ask the question, do you support the death penalty or life in prison without parole, it drops to 50-50. So you can manipulate polls. I think that people have a very real fear of disorder. And people have what I think is a very real anger and fear about the horrible crimes that we see. And my feeling is that the initial reaction of wanting the death penalty, nothing makes more sense in the world to me than that. And it's when you step back and you say, okay, let's look at the murders that are in the news right now in Massachusetts, in Vermont. How many of these are death penalty cases? How many of them aren't? Why are they? Why aren't they? You start to realize that but the death penalty gets held up. I mean, the woman today, the point woman for the governor, you said that she lied 8 times. I counted 10. We'll have to compare notes later.
Yeah.
But she was making stuff up.
I'm willing to be educated.
Yeah, exactly. She was making stuff up left and right. And she said there's no sure sign. We must let criminals know that if they take another life, they will be executed. Well, as Paris pointed out, 100 people get executed a year, give or take, 20,000 commit murder. So, but they hold it up as it's the worst of the worst, everybody will get a fair lawyer, and it's the only way that we sanctify human life, and it'll prevent crime.
Did you notice Jeffrey Dahmer wasn't executed, but the convicts killed him? He didn't even get the death penalty, was not a candidate.
Frank's Wisconsin Amendment.
Yeah, well, even over and above that, what happens is that if something is truly a high-profile case, there will be a lawyer come out of the bushes because he can make a reputation on it. And the guy that's most likely to get the execution is the poor schmuck who did whatever down the street, and nobody cares except his mama.
My favorite line today, that the woman, that she was the Secretary for Public Safety in Massachusetts, and my favorite line of hers today was someone pointed out to her, well, the governor's law says that if you're on trial for a capital case in Massachusetts, you'll get an attorney who's tried a capital case. And one of the state reps very shrewdly asked, well, we haven't had a capital case in Massachusetts in about 30 years. So you might have trouble finding lawyers. And she said, no, 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 no. There's Johnny Cochran. There's lawyers that'll fly in and take these cases. I mean, the myth. Now, there was a case where they said, there are $400 an hour attorneys out there lining up to take death row cases.
Oh, yeah, right.
How much do you have to be invested in the system to be willing to believe that? You know, if you'll take that and say, oh, I feel all right about the death penalty because Johnny Cochran will come and defend anybody that needs to be defended. That's where we're at.
Where are all the religious people? I mean, wouldn't you think that they have a different perspective on killing?
Depends on where they're from. The ones in my neighborhood say that they're not in the Bible Belt, they're the buckle. And their idea of justice is to be out there with the torch as soon as somebody's got the wood stacked. In other words, set fire to somebody. In my neighborhood, you see, one of them...
Which book is that in?
Well, you got to understand that the book is one of those things that you can pull things out of. What I do is I cheat. I wrote my own book. I literally call it the Book of Carriger. And in the Book of Carriger it says, the more words required to explain something to me, the better chance that it's a lie. It doesn't quite ring with the Bible, but it's useful.
Well, I should say that, I mean, the Pope came out a couple of years ago and came out against the death penalty. And in Massachusetts, one of the reasons we don't have it is because Cardinal Law, 2 years ago, wrote an op-ed piece saying it's a sin to support the death penalty. So there have been religious leaders. But I mean, the Pope, one of the most extraordinary injustices, so you shouldn't start comparing them, but a few years ago in Missouri, he was due to arrive in Missouri on the day that a convict was to be executed. This was a guy who confessed to multiple homicide. The governor of Missouri, feeling the heat from that, commuted that man's sentence to life. The next guy up to be executed was someone who was in prison on a robbery that it turned out after 10 years in prison, someone else confessed to he had done the robbery. While in prison was implicated by 2 other inmates in a murder in the middle of a riot. That guy, who didn't commit either of the crimes, was executed because the governor of Missouri, having given the one leniency because of the Pope. So again...
Is that the one they had the pictures of him being someplace else?
Yeah, I think that's...
No, I thought that was interesting.
They
had prison video that showed he was elsewhere when that...
Right.
Yeah. And they still had him convicted and sentenced under that. Never trust the state to do anything right if it's cheaper to do something else. I appreciate it.